What's up, college football addicts? Today I'm going to talk to you guys about the 6 ACC teams who are in pretty deep trouble in regards to conference realignment. Now, if you're a fan of one of these 6 teams, you're definitely going to want to stick around because your team's future is on the line here. And if you're not a fan of one of these 6 teams, the video is still jam-packed with info that you need to know about conference realignment. Just before we get started, it would be greatly appreciated if you took a quick moment to subscribe. I really enjoyed you guys' comments yesterday telling me what teams you cheer for, who you support, who you root for. I did not realize the channel was that diverse. It was awesome to see all of the different teams you guys root for. But if you appreciate small channels like ours and other creators out there on YouTube, do them and do us a solid by hitting that subscribe button and letting them know that you appreciate the work that they do. Now, currently, there are 15 voting members of the ACC. That includes Notre Dame. They get a full vote, even though they haven't joined fully in football. It is expected that a simple majority of those teams, that'd be 8 total, could dissolve the conference. Now, this would have to happen prior to June 30th, 2024, because after that, Stanford, Cal, and SMU join, and the task of dissolving the conference becomes much harder. So for this video, we're going to leave Stanford, Cal, and SMU out of it. If anything was to happen, it would have to happen again before that July 1st deadline. So just to repeat, it's 15 voting members. It takes 8 to dissolve, a simple majority. Right now, the ACC is basically split up into 3 distinct groups. There are teams who would vote to dissolve the league because they are expected to have an invite to the Power 2. There are teams who will not vote to dissolve the league now because they don't have a current invite to the Power 2. And there are teams who will never vote to dissolve the league because they will never be invited to the Power 2. Today, we're going to be focusing on that middle group, the teams who don't have invites but could possibly get one in the future. But we're going to quickly just run through them all just to make sure you guys understand which teams fall into which groups. There are 3 to 4 teams who would vote to dissolve the league right now. And those teams are UNC, Florida State, Clemson, and then probably NC State. We have talked about that some. That's a likely one because we're hearing rumors that they may be coming a take for the SEC and the Big Ten in a package deal with North Carolina. North Carolina State's value may not be there completely, but North Carolina's value is such, and the rules in North Carolina are such that to get North Carolina, you may have to bring NC State along with them. NC State kind of gets their get out of jail free thanks to Big Brother, and so they would certainly vote to dissolve. Then there are 5 teams who would never vote to dissolve the league. Notre Dame, who is a football independent, Boston College, Georgia Tech, Syracuse, and Wake Forest. None of them would ever vote to dissolve this league. And then there are 6 teams that we're going to talk about today who right now will not vote to dissolve the league unless they were sure that they had an invite to the Power 2. Those schools are Louisville, Miami, Pittsburgh, Virginia, Virginia Tech, and Duke. And I can't stress this enough. If you are a fan of one of those 6 teams, it is important that you pay attention. Let's start with the good news. It's my belief that all 6 of these teams would be full member takes of the Big 12. And that Big 12 money would basically lock you into making the same that you're making in the current ACC, which has Florida State, Clemson, UNC as its members. It's also my belief that several of you could possibly be taken in the Big 10 or the SEC in the very near future, but you'd have to take a discount to do so, similar to what some of the schools in the Big 10 have done. And you'd have to reach a certain threshold of revenue generation before I think you'd be allowed a full share. But I think this is a blessing because taking a small haircut and hypothetically making 80% in the SEC or the Big 10 would make you far more than what's left of either the ACC or a trip to the Big 12. So it'll be a pretty easy decision when these opportunities come. But the Big Ten and the SEC are not going to focus on the partial revenue teams until after all of the full revenue participants have been added. So I know what a lot of you guys are thinking. Oh, this video is just clickbait. It sounds like these teams are in a good position. You haven't told us why these 6 teams are in serious trouble. So let's look at the bad news too then. The first piece of bad news is the ACC has very little negotiating leverage currently. With the addition of SMU, Stanford, and Cal to BC, Georgia Tech, Syracuse, and Wake, the ACC will have 7 members who draw group of 5 level audiences. Whether they realize it or not, over the long haul, this is an absolute travesty for the ACC. And when FSU, Clemson, and North Carolina leave the conference, those 6 in that middle group are going to be the flagship programs pulling the value of the conference ahead. And the 7 that are behind them are going to be leeching off of them. And the average of those 6 Big 12 worthy teams plus those 7 basically group of 5 teams until 2036 is going to be far less than what they would get by dissolving and going to the Big 12 for a few years until the SEC or the Big 10 were ready for them. I'll repeat that back. The average of those 6 Big 12 worthy teams, plus the 7, we'll call them last level, group of 5 type teams, until 2036 is going to be far less than what they would get by just dissolving and going to the Big 12 for a few years until the SEC or Big 10 were ready. And when I say far less, I'm counting all of that buy-in money that they're getting from SMU, Cal, and Stanford. I'm counting that exit money that they're going to be settling for Florida State, Clemson, and UNC, and maybe NC State with. They're going to be forced to settle for pennies on the dollar with this, so that money's not all that it's cracked up to be at this point. As I said yesterday, the Big Ten, the SEC, and the 3 states have plans to tear this league apart. And they plan to do it by leveraging the ESPN contract and using that power that they have to end the media deal anytime between right now, today, and February of 2025. I can guarantee you this, if you extend the timeline until 2036, all of the money leaving the conference will not come close to being offset by the money coming into the conference. The teams staying in the ACC will make far less than the teams in the Big 12 before this is all over, because ESPN is certainly going to force the ACC to take a giant pay cut. I'll tell you what, don't just take my word for it. I have a challenge for you, any of you who don't believe me. Don't just yell at me down in the comments and tell me how much of an idiot I am. I already know. Instead, reach out to the local media that covers your team and ask them about the recent college football playoff contract and the provisions that were added allowing the SEC and the Big Ten to raid the ACC and the Big 12 without any financial penalties. None of this stuff is out in the public yet. There's a reason they aren't revealing it, because if they did, fans of the 6 ACC teams who are borderline would pull the escape hatch right now. But maybe your local media can pull a few strings and get you the cliff notes so that you can realize why dissolving the conference between June 30th and being able to negotiate on the open market is a far safer play here, as opposed to having an anchor tied around your neck with 7 group of 5 schools until 2036. You are exponentially increasing your risk by tying yourself to those 7 group of 5 schools. So if I had one piece of advice for those ADs of those 6 teams, to the athletic directors of Miami, Louisville, Pittsburgh, Virginia Tech, and Duke, to those boards of trustees, those university presidents, it's to force the entire settlement with all the teams leaving and to have your new ESPN ACC agreement in place prior to June 30th so that you have a chance to blow up this league if things go south for you. Once Stanford and SMU and Cal join and Florida State, Clemson, and NC State and North Carolina are out, you lose way too much voting power. You see, Florida State and Clemson and others will get out. SMU and others are coming in, and you lose the strongest chip you have to maybe blow this thing up. They talked about the Magnificent Seven. That Magnificent Seven gets a whole lot less magnificent without Florida State, Clemson, and North Carolina in it. I would not go beyond June 30th without dissolving this conference. unless I had a signed contract with the remaining ACC teams and ESPN extended beyond February of 2025. And a well-defined escape hatch so that you can essentially escape this conference and not get trapped again. Realize this, when you run the time scale to 2036, you have far more in common with FSU, Clemson, and UNC than you do with the 7 group of 5 members. Because the 7 group of 5 members plus Notre Dame's plan is to trap you better than they did Florida State, Clemson, and UNC. Because you're going to be the only thing that's stopping them from falling back down into the group of 5. Like I said before, ESPN isn't going to have another unilateral clause to pull that will save them like it does with Florida State, Clemson, and UNC. And all the leverage that teams have right now to possibly build an escape path will completely end on June 30th of this year. Once Florida State, Clemson, and UNC are gone, once the new teams enter this conference, if you are a mid-level team, you lose the voting power at the top. You gain additional votes that are not going to go your way when you're trying to get out. And so if you're a fan of one of those teams, you better hope and pray. You better put pressure on your AD. You better send this to the people that matter, because that's the only way you will realistically get out of this conference and get to a Big 12 that has stability. One day get to a Big 10 or an SEC that has money. There's only one way that it's going to happen, and it's for this conference to be dissolved. Let's talk about it down in the comments. If you're a fan of one of these teams, I want to hear your thoughts. If you're a fan of one of the group of 5 level teams, the 3rd level, please don't take offense, but I'd like to hear your thoughts as well. Will teams that are down in that level start to put a bigger investment in football? We'll see. We'll see what their market share would look like, what their attractiveness to a big conference would look like. Right now, they're not being talked about, but I'm down to talk about it down in the comments. I appreciate those of you who are part of the channel and subscribed here at College Football Addiction.